Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar, which is being brought to you by Project Safety Journal. The session is entitled How the Environment Agency is Sharing Data to Save Lives, and it's in association with IdeaGen Mail Manager. I'm Denise Shevin, and I'm chairing the session. So in today's programme, the Environment Agency and its partners will detail the development of the Sharing Data Saving Lives project. The project has developed systems, data schema and data exchange tools that enable risk information to be shared more effectively and efficiently across its projects. It makes risk information available to all the duty holders on a project to improve design risk management, enhance interface between the design and construction phases, and to manage handover information and the health and safety file more efficiently. In the second half of the webinar, IdeaGen Mail Manager will focus on an often neglected part of information management, which is email management. Email is by far the most common project correspondence tool, but poor management can mean project information is lost and time is wasted searching emails. And I can certainly testify to that. And then, as usual, will be a Q&A session at the end. So let me begin by introducing our speakers. They are Karen Alford, the Digital and Data Standards Manager at the Environment Agency. Chris Lucas, who is Principal Inspector of Health and Safety at the HSE. Next, we have David Webborn, a Senior Associate Director and Head of Information Management for Water and the Environment at Jacobs. And then following David, we have Graham Tappenden, Director of Lingwell Consulting. And then finally, will come along George Emily, who's a Senior Client Manager at IdeaGen Mail Manager. But before we dive into the webinar, there's a bit of housekeeping I must run through. So please use the Q&A function, not the chat function, the Q&A function to ask questions of the speakers. You can pose questions as yourself or anonymously, but not as someone else. Our panelists will address your questions in the Q&A session at the end. There'll be 10-15 minutes for that. Just to let you know, this webinar is being recorded and will be available to watch on demand via the original registration link, and that will be available from tomorrow morning. Finally, there's a 1-hour CPD credit for those who complete this webinar live, and CPD certificates will be issued tomorrow. You can only qualify for a CPD credit if you're watching by your own registration link. I think that's it. So over to our speakers. Karen, can you turn on your mic and camera and start sharing your screen? Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I've got an able-bodied assistant. Justin is going to be managing my slides. So I just wanted just a couple of minutes just to share the Environment Agency's sort of overview of our journey. We were mandated to deliver the BIM mandate right at the beginning of sort of 2012. And we were very much supported by government and cross-sharing learning from other departments. But right from the beginning, we realised that we had, unlike some others, we had a capital programme of 800 projects. So we had to take really an organisational led approach. And that was very much, how can we do BIM in all its guises, information management across a whole program, because we couldn't rely on individual projects to experiment, I suppose you could say. So as part of that, we introduced a digital community of practice, and we, as part of that community, we engaged with the HSE probably as far back as 2015, and Gordon Crick at the time sort of shared with us some of the challenges the health and safety exec have around, when they're, particularly when they're investigating, but also he shared with us their sort of longer term ambition about making, improving the standards and using BIM and sort of the information management across the whole asset life cycle to improve health and safety management. So we were very much sort of engage ourselves and our community of practice members in the in 2002, looking at what we could do to contribute to the health and safety execs desire to move forward. So if I just quickly move to the next slide, I think this is, I'm not planning on going through this slide, but just to highlight that as part of our program of improvements, there have been a number of activities that we've had to do. So although we talk about sort of 2015, it's now 2025, that's 10 years, but there have been lots of things that we've had to do beforehand before we could get to this stage. And I think that's, for me, a sort of message I want people to take away. You can do this, but there's lots of other little things that need to be in place first that I know David will cover during his presentation, but you can't do it alone. There's lots of other things that need to be done. So I'm now going to hand over to Chris from HSE, and I'll turn off my camera and hand over to Chris.
Thanks very much, Karen. My name is Chris Lucas. I work with the HSE manager team looking at technology innovation in the construction sector, and just thought it'd be a good opportunity really to give a brief context from my perspective. So as you'll see from the background, HSE is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. And during that period, significant improvements in workplace health and safety have been made. And the UK remains one of the safest countries in which to work. It's important that the pace and scale of improvements is maintained and not plateauing when all the low-hanging fruit has been considered. And this is particularly important for the health challenges we face. Data analytics present an opportunity for a paradigm shift in how we understand risk scenarios, their treatments, and capture wider learning. And here I'd make the analogy with football. Data analytics now is a key part of football. It does everything from player recruitment, training, tactics, fan engagement, and has actually revolutionized that kind of sport and the way people approach it. As project and asset management complexity increases, so too does the importance of providing the right health and safety information to the right people at the right time. And risk can thrive at the interfaces if not properly managed. Digitalization and data sharing can overcome these limitations associated with traditional information management methods. It also opens up opportunities for significant health and safety improvements, which we want forward-thinking companies to be aspiring to. Realizing these opportunities is not without its challenges. The Sharing Data Saving Lives project explored some key practical issues around how data can be shared and what the blockers and enablers are. That was a project undertaken in 2022 by HSE in conjunction with the Open Data Institute, Atkins Realis and Metis Digital Limited, and it was funded by a grant from the regulator's Pioneer Fund. And it concluded that there is a compelling financial, legal and moral case for better sharing of risk-related data in a construction project, and also between the project and the ongoing management of an asset. Businesses understand the potential benefits, but data sharing was challenging in practice due to overarching security, privacy and commercial concerns. And finally, there were practical issues around sharing risk data, as this was not typically produced in a format that enabled this. This limited the value of what can be shared by those willing to do it. Realising the benefits and overcoming the challenges takes leadership, both from industry as a whole and important clients within it, like the Environment Agency. The work they've been carrying out has standardised terminology, established a common data schema for risk, and developed a workflow to support a distributed common data environment. Implementing these challenges will make risk management information available to all, sharing data to save lives. And with that, I'd like to hand over to David Webborn, who'll cover from the Environment Agency's work in detail. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much. Ken, just checking you can all see the screen.
Yeah, that's fine.
You can. Great. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the details of the project that ourselves in Jacobs have delivered with the Environment Agency and partners, sharing data, saving lives. This is the Environment Agency's digital approach to health and safety risk management. So Karen has provided the background and Chris some of the wider context as well. Specifically then with this project, our aim here was to establish a framework whereby structured safety, health, environment and well-being information can be procured and used by the Environment Agency throughout the asset lifecycle. And so the specific outputs of this particular project are firstly a specification for structured SHU risk information, an updated toolkit for communicating connected SHU risk information, a defined format for enabling the exchange of that information. So that's throughout a project lifecycle from one delivery partner to another or to the end user. Another output is a digital format health and safety file. And then from the Environment Agency's perspective, really putting in place the infrastructure for data visualization and analytics within their own in-house platforms. There's a geospatial platform called EasyMap, 3D model viewer called 3D Repo that's integrated into their common data environment. And also dashboards so that they are gathering project level risk information at a national scale and can view a national database of risk across their operational asset base. So some context then, as I said, we're talking about sharing health and safety risk information across the asset lifecycle. At the top of the screen, you can see the Environment Agency's 7-stage plan of work for a capital works project, starting from the strategic and feasibility, going through design to construction, handback, and then into asset operation and end of life. Across the bottom of the screen are typical deliverables that the supply chain is required to produce and deliver and exchange during that project process. And these are deliverables required by the construction design and management regulations. And that's what we have to do on any capital project for the Environment Agency, and we will still have to do that. What this project is doing is changing the way that happens, making it more consistent, making it easier to share information delivered and prepared by one delivery partner to the next as the project progresses through its life cycle. And at the core of this is implementing publicly available specification 1192 part 6. That's the BIM specification for sharing health and safety risk information. That has now literally within the last few days or weeks morphed into ISO 19650 part 6. So that's the International Information Management Standard, and part 6, the health and safety piece, has now been published. So we've had sight of that in the development of this project, and we've tried to position what we've done to accommodate for what we expected to be coming with part 6 of ISO 19650. But this is fundamentally about giving the Environment Agency a consistent means of receiving health and safety risk information across its supply chain throughout the whole delivery cycle of assets. So I'm going to talk now briefly about the data structure. So this is at the core of what we have delivered on this project. We've defined a specification, a means of describing and capturing how we treat health and safety risks at any stage of a project. And this is built on what's in PAS 1192 Part 6. At the top level, we've defined a parent and child risk and risk instance relationship. The parent risks items are where we describe much of what the risk is. So it's most of the information that we require in our risk specification is defined at that risk level. And we link risk to associated assets, associated activities, and there is one asset and one activity per individual risk. If an asset is applicable, it may not, of course. We then define child risk instances, which then allow the risks to be modeled essentially in space and time. And the whole reason for doing this was to try and cut down on the amount of duplication of information and manual re-entry of the same information. So if you have one risk that may occur in multiple locations, you define the risk once and then you assign it to multiple child risk instances that each have a different location. Or maybe they occur at different times. It's the same risk occurring, perhaps it occurs at stage 2 and stage 3 of the project, but because it's transitioning across stages, we can capture it at each individual stage. So the child risk instance model just allows us to capture and model the risks in time and space and do that in as efficient a way as possible. So in terms of what we actually need to capture within the risk specification, as I said, this is generally based on PAS 1192 Part 6, but tailored to meet the needs of the Environment Agency. We're also bringing into this the Uniclass system for classifying risks. So this is something that was published as we were developing this project. If you look at PAS 1192 Part 6, they had a means of classifying risks in that schema. But then Uniclass have published their own risk tables, and the Environment Agency is aligning to Uniclass wherever possible. So we've adopted the Uniclass risk classification, and I'll talk a bit more about that shortly. But that's a fundamental part of classifying the risk. Classifying it as a specific type of risk, so whether it's an electrical injury risk or a fire and explosion risk, Uniclass provides the means of assigning a risk to a particular type. So we can do that, but then we can also describe the risk in detail as well. So this is all about setting the scene for the risk, describing it, classifying it. We then quantify it, and we do so by identifying the consequence and the likelihood of the risk occurring, and that is using the prescribed method in PAS 1192 Part 6. And once we've done that, we then identify risk treatments. So risk treatments is a terminology that is used in ISO 19650 Part 6. And that actually requires you to define, so you define your risks, and then you define your treatments separately in a separate data set. And then I think what it is essentially suggesting is that you can pick off from your list of treatments those that you're going to use to treat a particular risk. So we haven't got to that point yet with this project. That's something that we will look to develop in the next phase, but we still have the ability to identify the risk treatment using the ERIC, eliminate, reduce, isolate, control approach, and describe the treatment that we're going to apply in detail. Once we treated the risk, then we quantify its residual risk level. So hopefully we've treated it, we've reduced the risk, but there will be undoubtedly some residual risk. So we re-quantify it to determine the residual level of risk. And then we identify who that risk needs to be managed by in the next stage of the delivery process. So if you're a designer, you'll probably pass it on to the contractor if it's a risk that's going to be present during the construction phase, or it will go into the operational phase, and so it will go into the asset operator or the end user. So you'll define all of that in the system as well. That all happens at the parent risk level. Then at the risk instance level, we model the risk in time and space. And this allows us to be selective over what we model, because if we modeled everything, we're going to create a lot of extra burden on delivery teams when it's not necessary. So we essentially filter the risks. We're only interested in risks that have a moderate or greater residual risk, and it's those that we take forward for defining the risk instances and actually modeling in time and space. So I'm just going to now talk about the cycle that's in PAS 1192 Part 6, frame what we've done around that. So firstly, identify, then use, and then share. So firstly, we've got to identify the risks. And so as the Environment Agency builds up its national database of risk, ultimately, the supply chain will be able to go to their site location, probably draw a box and say, right, pull off all the known risks in that particular location as a starting point. So we're not started from scratch. We have an existing asset base with known risks. So what are the known risks? And let's start from there. We then update those risks. We add new risks depending on what the project is doing, whether it's creating new assets, modifying existing assets. But that information is ultimately captured in a standard format for exchanging the information. Now, somewhat disappointingly, that format is an Excel sheet. Excel we identified as being something that all the supply chain will have access to. So we've gone for a lowest common denominator approach. That is simply a means of getting data from one party to the next across a contract line. How the data gets into that sheet is entirely up to the particular supplier. They could edit the Excel sheet directly. They could use a custom application like the Power App you see on the screen on the right to edit that or populate that sheet in a more user-friendly way, or develop a custom application perhaps. Maybe it's linked to a geospatial database. You could directly model the information within CAD and then export to your risk exchange schema. There's lots of different ways of doing this. It's up to the supply chain. What solution works best for them is going to be up to them, what works within their workflows, etc. So we provide a format for delivering information, and we've suggested means that users could create that information, nice interfaces to actually input the risk information and manage it. We also need to model it. On Karen's slide at the start with all the Lego bricks, there was a lot of stuff on there. You probably won't have seen it, but one of the Lego bricks that was introduced at the start or much earlier on in this digital transformation journey that the Environment Agency is going on is the CAD and object standard. So they have a defined standard and whole suite of tools for graphically representing assets and presenting design information on drawings in models, etc. And so we're using that and updating that with a whole collection of tools to help the supply chain model and communicate risk information. And at the core of this are a suite of pictograms, icons to communicate risk. The CAD and object standard initially had a lot of these that are aligned to a particular ISO standard, the number of which escapes my mind. So there's a whole host of these standard warning symbols that the Environment Agency have used within their CAD and object standard. What we've done is taken those and aligned them to the Uniclass risk classification. So we've got Uniclass classifications for environmental risk, health and safety risk, operational risk, personal and public safety risk, security risk, and social risk. There are other risk categories in Uniclass, but they don't really relate to health and safety. They're more about financial risk, procurement, that sort of thing. So these are the risk categories that we've taken from Uniclass and are adopting. And so we've updated the CAD standard to provide specific symbology for each of the second level within each of the main headings. There is then a second level of risk. And so the iconography all aligns to that second level. There is then a further breakdown that the users can adopt, but the iconography is streamlined to this second level. So we're working with a relatively concise set of visuals that the users can bring into models and drawings. And so that's been updated into the CAD and Object Standard Toolkit. So we've got a full suite of new risk cool art blocks that are using those icons, but presenting information in different ways. So we can do things in 3D. We can present the icon with the defined risk reference. We can include things like a bounding box on the risk, which is we're actually then essentially modeling the extents of the risk and capturing the geometry that we then use to put into the data schema that's then translated the other end in the EA systems to map them, etc. So that's how we're kind of capturing or modeling the risk in space by using some of these tools here. We've then also included within the CAD standard things like object property sets that are effectively replicating the schema. So they're all aligned to the risk schema. So the user could create an object in the CAD environment, attach a property set and populate that as a form. That's going to capture all the risk information associated with the object in the model. And then it can be taken out of the CAD model, put into the risk exchange format and delivered to the client that way. We use attributes within the blocks that we've defined to capture some of the properties, as I've already hinted at. So you can see some of the coordinate geometry there that we're able to capture, convert that into a JSON bounding box, which is a standard means of communicating geospatial information that the Environment Agency use. So we can automatically create all of that just by placing a block in a relevant location, dragging out the box to capture its extents, and that is automatically producing all the coordinate information that we can capture and deliver to the Environment Agency. And we're also provided a means of connecting the risk database to boxes on drawings that are highlighting the significant residual risks that are relevant to whatever the drawing is showing. So we can take data from a central source and synchronize it onto specific drawings, and that just helps make the user's workflow more efficient and cuts down the amount of manual copying and pasting and therefore scope for human error and inconsistent information. So this gets into workflows and how data flows from one source and is used in other deliverables and making that whole process as efficient as possible. So I've talked about using an application as an interface, a nice interface to actually generate the information, update the information, and generally manage the risks as the project develops. That's linked to the database, the exchange format for the risk information. And we can contribute the geometric data from the CAD model to that using various means, dynamo graphs, whatever it is, to gather the geometric information and bring it into that master risk database. And then we can use that, as I've suggested, to then feed some of that information back out onto drawings for users' shoeboxes. As you can see here, we assemble the data just within Excel very simply, and then provide a link to the drawing to show that information in a drawing without having to manually copy and paste. There are lots of other means that you could do this. This is meant to be an out-of-the-box solution option that the supply chain can use without having to develop anything bespoke. But there are other bespoke options out there that may well be more efficient and more powerful. So that's the supply chain using the risk information, bringing it out into models and drawings, and communicating risk as part of their duties under the CDM regulations. That's all great. And a lot of that is what we do already. We're just streamlining how we do it. What's now really key is that by having this information in a consistent structure, we can deliver the data to the Environment Agency, as well as the drawings, the models, etc. We can deliver the data to the Environment Agency, which they can then use, and they can consume it within their own systems by providing, because we've got that consistent means of exchange, the data can automatically be read and then consumed and viewed in different systems and platforms client side. So this is the process. The supply chain will deliver the risk information to the client via the exchange common data environment. That information, when it lands in the common data environment, will be automatically read and verified using the Environment Agency data rules and visualization data store, which includes various scripts to verify information, check data quality, check that it aligns to the data specifications, all that sort of thing. So it goes through that assurance process automatically as soon as it lands within the common data environment, and then can be unpacked into and displayed in various different platforms that already exist within the agency. So they have a geospatial web mapping application called EasyMap. So EasyMap will take the data from that data store and read it and populate a risk layer within EasyMap, such that we will then build up a layer that covers the whole country, covers the whole of England, to show the risk burden that the Environment Agency has across its asset base. So that's doing it via geospatial. Every project has within the client CDE, there is a 3D model visualization tool called 3D Repo. So 3D Repo has a module within it called Safety Base, and so we have wired Safety Base into the data store, such that when the supplier delivers the risk information from their stage of the project, it will automatically be read into Safety Base, and so anyone client side can go into the model and can call out the risk information, view it all within the 3D Repo interface, and see all of the data and access all of that information very, very easily just by browsing the 3D model. And then we can also deliver that information and visualize it in dashboards. This is a mock-up dashboard that we've produced for the agency, and I'll talk a bit more about that now. So here it is. This is a basic risk dashboard, just showing risk information, and because of the data structure that we have, you can slice and dice the information as you please. You can view it by project, drill into specific risk categories, look at risks associated with a specific activity or asset type, and use this to help understand risk burden. And you see here on the right of the screen, we're actually taking the time element and modeling or showing the Environment Agency what their risk burden is over time. So they'll be able to see, okay, where have they got peaks where suddenly, because there's a lot of projects all on site at one go, there's a lot more risk that staff will be exposed to. So that will help to sharpen the mind and perhaps focus resources as needed. There's all sorts of things that you can do with this data when it's in this structure. Spot patterns, use it to compare against health and safety risk incidents, and ultimately use this information to create safer working environments for anyone involved in the Environment Agency's asset management and construction program. So that's risk information in dashboards. We've also mocked up, as part of this project, digital format pre-construction information documents and health and safety files. So this is taking the risk information and also the information held within the common data environment, and based on the metadata that all information containers should have within the common data environment, we can pick and choose information automatically to effectively automatically build a health and safety file. So a health and safety file requires specific information. So it's as-built information, information about buried services and utilities, other data sets, and based on the how the information in the CDE is structured, we can automatically pull that information out and very quickly show that in a single place, so that anyone needing to access this information in the future can come to a single dashboard and immediately connect to the specific information and know that that information is the up-to-date information. It's not a hard copy that's been stuffed away in a shed or an office for years. This is the latest known information. We can immediately access that. We can access the 3D models that were produced by this project and drill into information, get what we're after as quickly as possible. So that's a digital format health and safety file. And we've also looked at doing that with the pre-construction information document as well. So the final slide then is just to summarize this project and what we've done. So we have defined a data structure and an exchange format for consistent sharing of health and safety risk information. We've got an updated toolkit for communicating that risk information, new icons for quickly symbolizing risks that are all aligned to our data structure, and with that, objects to actually model those risks and capture geometric data easily from within a CAD model. We've got workflows to help pass information to drawings and visualizations to communicate risk, cut down on manual data re-entry, and improve efficiency, and just really unlock the power of well-structured connected risk information to deliver business insight and ultimately help plan for a safer working environment. And we can also visualize the information, as I said, in existing Environment Agency platforms instantly, just by delivering the information in that consistent format. This project is a phase 1. We are looking at a phase 2 for work, and so there are future opportunities now that we have a consistent structure. So future opportunities that we're considering are things like on-device notifications, so risk information with space and time awareness. We can look at, is it going to be helpful when you're on site to be notified that you're entering an area where there is a significant residual risk? What is that risk? It's just a glance of a notification, either on your phone, your watch. If we ever get to the point where we've got really nice Google Glass type AR headsets on site, so not cumbersome things that are currently there, but if it's built into your glasses, a quick heads up notification that you're entering a high risk area, that's something that we could potentially do with this in the future. And also using AI to suggest risk treatments based on, okay, you've defined a risk. Okay, based on that, here are some suggested risk treatments that you may look to use or want to consider to actually help manage and reduce that risk. So there you go. That's a summary of what we've done, and we are rolling this out in the next few months to the supply chain in the Environment Agency. So I think I'm going to hand it on to Graham now, if you're there, Graham, and I will stop sharing my screen.
Hope you can hear me. Yep, you're fine.
Right, hello.
Yep, you're fine.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how much time I've got, but
Yeah, it might need to be a
I'll
bit
keep
quick, I'm afraid. Yeah.
I'll be really quick. So I'm going to look this from I'm Graham Tapton. I'm technical lead on a good number of those Lego bricks that Karen referred to, and I've been working with the Environment Agency since about 2014 on this long journey, which this is some of the bits of the iceberg sticking above the mass that's under the water. So what I'm just going to quickly do is describe how the delivery of risk information fits in with the general information and data delivery pipeline that we use on all projects. And that follows the ISO 19650 side of things, but develops it in an information management platform approach, which not only looks at delivery of files, but looks at assurance of files and data, etc. So if I can hopefully get this working. Yeah, it is. It's starting to work now. So we follow a process where we specify information on every project through a project information delivery plan. The supplier then works to confirm the procurement of that information through the normal processes. And in the case of the health and safety risk, there involves a federated 3D model, which David has referred to, and also the SHU risk information in the standard open format. All of that arrives in the client CDE at various gateways, which allows us to then look at it, assuring it through an automatic approach, which takes the data, looks at data quality, looks at the fields that need to be there, and passes it on to a global data store or a national data store, which in terms of risk, extracts risk information. It also knows about the 3D models that have been delivered, and it pushes that data, in the case of health and safety information, as David noted, into a thing called Safety Base. It pushes it into the GIS risk information. It also enables us to have handover health and safety file and a pre-construction health and safety file in terms of presenting that data internally. And then eventually, with phase 2, we're looking to make sure that we can do that whole life, because in terms of assets in the whole life of a flood defense asset, for instance, it doesn't know about the project that delivered it, so we have to turn that information into something that can relate geospatially in terms of risk information and enable that to be shared amongst all the parties, and also to enable us to integrate it with, perhaps as David said, incidents, so we can have fast response to incidents and risks that might be susceptible to those incidents. That's all I'm going to say. I'm going to hand it back now. I hope that's sufficient. Any questions at the end, please?
Well, thanks so much, guys, for running through all of that. As we said, we'll take questions at the end. So I'm quickly going to hand over to George, who's going to talk through the IdeaGen Mail Manager system. Over to you, George.
Yeah, hi guys. Thank you very much. That was super helpful and really insightful to sort of hear those perspectives. As I mentioned, my name is George Emmons. I work with sort of businesses globally within sort of the AEC, so architecture, engineering, and construction firms, mainly to sort of help unify their project information. So what do I want to talk to you today about? Well, for the first point, I think it's really worth noting the obvious things, and I think we've highlighted earlier today, is the technology landscape is globally changing at a really quick speed. And this is no different in the AEC. As I'm sure you've all noticed from your own work, technology is continually to rapidly evolve the way that we all work to drive cheaper and quicker projects. Today, there are numerous examples of new technologies we've seen today, and these are revolutionising the AEC, including artificial intelligence and virtual reality as well. There's no surprise that with everything going on in the world right now, and teams working remotely or a hybrid environment, that it's becoming more and more difficult to actually access this project information when we need to. It's really worth noting that a lot of AEC professionals like yourselves rely on strong, consistent communication. This often takes in the form of pitches, winning clients, or day-to-day communication with your colleagues. The days have sadly gone, albeit maybe sort of limited, where you can turn around to your colleague behind you and ask them for that particular email, for example. What this means for a lot of people is they don't have access to that information at the right time and often left outside that communication loop. And as I'm sure you can all imagine, this is a huge problem across the industry at the moment. With over, I think, 400 billion emails expected to be sent and received globally in the next year or so. And this has risen massively on the year before. Email is considered the most used communication and collaboration tool across the world, but it's one thing that everyone manages differently and is creating massive risks for the future. One of these risks, of course, comes in the form of project rework. And with a study finding that 80% of project professionals spend half their time on rework, and poor communication costs about £62 million on average each year, so a massive amount. So rework doesn't just waste your time and money, but can cause huge communication breakdowns within your team and your senior executive teams and, of course, stakeholders as well. So here at Mail Manager, we actually did a sort of a survey within the last year or so called the State of the AEC Project Management Report. This aims to sort of explore the feelings and the mood across project management and collaboration challenges that are faced amongst the AEC. So I think we surveyed about 550 companies across the globe. But let's jump straight into the report. Firstly, we find that a majority of firms have stated that they cannot easily access their products information. So we found that about 90% of respondents were concerned about accessibility and visibility. So definitely more than a majority there, almost all of them. And over a quarter of organisations have said that they have a risk of when you start leave the business, they have a risk of not being able to access that information. Most companies we speak to don't have an important email filing process when people leave the business. And I think roughly about 28% of emails, 28% of people surveyed don't require any emails to be filed whatsoever. So quite nerve-wracking there. Unsurprisingly, disputes are starting to rise year on year. In 2021, our research report a couple of years ago, 63% respondents had the disputes. Last year, those numbers rose to about 91%, so a significant increase there. And with regards to the reasons of these disputes, I think we all typically know what they are. So project scope changes, payment issues. These tend to be the key causes, but largely sort of the information is that is needed to stop these is buried away in emails and other formal documents. So in the current economic climate, we're seeing these trends of AEC where costs are on the rise. Margins are tighter than ever, and sadly, there are, of course, staff cutbacks. Even with the larger sort of global firms as well, we've seen this. So with so much uncertainty in the world and people leaving the business, there is a huge need for your organisation, anyone's organisation out there, to start thinking about their information management. If we look at a few of the stats on the screen, just to pick some of these out, 28% of these businesses do not have email filing as part of their offboarding process. 81%, I think, roughly percent of firms, emails a majority form of project communication, and thousands of these emails aren't actually filed ever easily accessible. Of 88% of the people surveyed, their overall volume of emails was actually considered to be increased year on year. So a massive need for people to save emails into project folders and get them easily accessible. So our research report actually covered a couple of other really interesting stats. One of the key stats that really shone out to me was that 90% of people, not 90, 9% of people surveyed had never experienced a dispute before, ever in the last year. So what we're seeing is that these disputes are on the rise and sort of tend to be gaining momentum. Why is this? Well, most of the reasons we found is that a lot of information regarding scope changes are stored in formal documents like emails. To break this down even further, only 12% of project scope changes do not reside in any digital space at all. So with findings like these, it's hardly surprising to find that most businesses get into hot water, and most businesses have a dispute across a year. It's only when your information is readily accessible and easy to find these disputes we can start to see begin to fall. Slides. So yeah, we're consistently starting to see that failing to make emails visible and accessible to project teams can cause massive legal disputes going forward. So according to ICC statistics on global average value of disputes, found that it was around 65 million US dollars was the average value of a dispute. Average length, about 16 months, so quite a significant amount of time. But firms cannot afford to let information like email correspondence slip through the cracks. We often hear this phrase, the leaky bucket of email management, negatively affecting AEC firms globally. Firms need to be really aware of their corporate and project history and be able to prove anything that's happened on the job, especially as the stakes are so high. But given that the size of the global disputes environment, the cost of mismanaging emails are immense. With proper email management in place, businesses can ensure that all project information and correspondence is captured and accessible by entire project teams. This will then reduce the cost of rework and stop project tracks in their not project disputes, I beg your pardon, in their tracks. That has been a bit of a whistle-stop tour, a brief overview of our research report in the last year. We'll be sending out a full report and getting in touch with you in the next sort of week or so. But I think it's worth mentioning that the excuses have got to go of I can't find an email, I've never been able to access it, or I don't know what's going on here, I'm coming into this bit green. All of those excuses, we've got to say now, I've got to go, because we're in a time of technology where it should be making everyone's lives easier. So that's where we come in, so why we're talking to you today. So what I wanted to do is introduce you to something we created here with Arup Engineering. So it's an email management system. Arup created themselves about 15 years ago. The reason why they actually created this, very simply, a lot of emails flying around their mailboxes, no consistent way of getting emails put into project folders. They'd ask people to manually drag and drop them, to write that CDE, no one was doing it. They wanted a clear audit trail. I think we've all seen the reasons just now on why we want emails to be saved away. But either people were doing it, it was wasting loads of time, but most of the time, no one was saving emails away. So information became really super locked in people's inboxes and difficult to find. So what they did is they went to market, tried to find a simple solution here by looking at just plucking something off the shelf and get something plugged in straight away. Couldn't find anything that would do this. So went the other side of it here and actually developed the system themselves. And that's sort of where we are today. So mainly work with firms in what we describe is the AEC, so architects, engineers, consultants, lots of subcontractors, estates teams. Those are our bread and butter, if like. Those are sort of our biggest used companies. And I've just included a slide here of some of our biggest and better known customers that I'm sure all of you will be familiar with. Genza, they're a fantastic client of ours. They've been using us for the last quite a few years now. They've done several case studies with us, with the most sort of interesting one saying that they've saved, and this is a stat they worked out themselves, that they've saved about 5 hours per user per week on email filing and administrative tasks. So really interesting here that we're not just looking to cut down the cost of disputes, but the cost of your employees, your time, which is of course very valuable. Ramble, very similar story here to Genza. Found that it was saving about 3 to 4 hours per user per week, so relatively similar stats there. And WSP, they've been a fantastic client of ours for the last 10 years, and just want to have all that information to hand. For them, it was all about project handovers. Someone leaves the business, how do we make sure we find their emails? WSP are super happy with what they're getting from Mail Manager to do that. So in terms of this slide here, I just wanted to highlight to all of you on the call here today, what are we trying to solve here? So if any of these things that I mentioned to you look relevant and of interest, get in touch and we can definitely show you how we'll solve these challenges. So what first on the course is the risk of some information in your company not being able to easily find. I think every business we speak to has got emails that they can find via IT, and if someone leaves, they can often go into an archive. But there's no easy way of finding this information. I always describe it as you've lost your keys, there's someone in the house, you've got to leave the house to get to the airport, you've got to really quickly find those keys. You're probably not going to find them. They're somewhere there, but it might take a few hours or so to find. Exactly the same with that first circle of emails. that comes on to the next one is yeah, wasted time spent filing and searching emails manually. I won't go into too much detail there. I think we know what that means. Lack of control. Now, often this means so many different things to lots of different people, but what it usually means to people we speak to is you put in place a process, you're really getting ahead as a business and putting in place an email management process, but no one's following it. And I think that's something we hear really often, and that's exactly what we're trying to solve here today. And lastly, far too often we find that people leave the business or go on holiday and we hear this phrase, can't get it, it's locked in the inbox. Absolutely understandable, especially when you're trying to work on a project with multiple people, or as I said, they leave the business. Super frustrating, especially if there's a dispute. So yeah, I think I've gone into a bit of detail here in terms of what are we trying to achieve, but essentially really easily access information. Can find an email whether you're involved in it or not in 2 or 3 seconds. There's no time being wasted at all with filing in the first place. So super efficiency when it comes to managing emails. But really, we're providing that single source of truth, that sort of golden thread of information on a project when it comes to email, so you can go back and find all this correspondence. That's it for me. Probably haven't got the time for a demonstration today. So if you've got any questions at all, guys, then get in touch. Usually what we'd do, if it looks relevant, we'd organise a more in-depth or tailored demonstration to you as a business. But yeah, it'd be good fun talking through the system today. I'm sure we'll go through the questions now.
Well, thank you so much, George, excuse me, for running through the mail manager system, which I think I could do with myself, actually. And thank you so much to the environment team of going through so comprehensively and explaining so well what the how you approach the project, and what a mammoth undertaking it was. I mean, amazing. So well done, guys. We've probably got about 10 minutes for questions. We're going to go slightly over, and we've got a few that have been posted in the chat already. So I'm going to quickly move on to those. I wondered, maybe this is one for, I'm not sure whether who might want to answer this one, but just wondering what hurdles were there in mapping the EA's original risk classification to Uniclass. I don't know who's asked that question, but they haven't given their name, so I don't know who would like to. I think that's one for you, David.
Yeah, I mean, I think we started off. This is before we'd even had sight of the Uniclass risk table. So we started off by essentially building the schema around the PAS 1192 classification, which is there in one of the annexes of the document, I think. So we built a load of pick lists and things around that, and then we were engaging with Uniclass, and we were aware of their risk classification system. So we had early sight of that. So then we set about realigning to that, and then it changed again. So we realigned again. I think they even changed I think it's the risks are defined as RK. That's the first 2 letters of a Uniclass code for a risk. It was something else initially. So we were kind of constantly playing a bit of catch up with that. But I think we just very quickly said, right, okay, no, we will adopt this. We had to go through a process of, okay, some of these are not going to be relevant, like the financial risk for the purpose of this project. It is relevant, of course, the agency, but not within the scope of our work. It may come into their wider risk management process at a later date. But yeah, we just kind of adopted it and then realigned all of the CAD icons, and we had to we wanted to use the icons that we had where possible to just remap them, and we were able to do that with about 90% of the Uniclass risk. But then we did have to come up with some others from the standard where they were available. Then there were 1 or 2 bespoke icons that we developed as well. But yeah, we've got that icon set now, and hopefully a comprehensive means of classifying risks on EA projects. Graham, you got your hand up.
Just a bit before that, Karen, Alan and I worked with a cross-government group and with a group called GIG that was funded earlier on, and we worked with NBS at Uniclass to define the risk tables, which came out of the Green Book information that most government departments use to classify risks across the scope. So there was a bit of toing and froing, and David's announced that, but those risks didn't come out of nowhere. They sort of came out of standard approaches that were already available. But of course, with lots of players pulling on what's in those tables, it ends up with a little bit of a compromise, but it was got there in time for this project.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Someone asked, and I know you've answered in the chat, Karen, but it'd be great to just, for the purposes of the people in the audience, have asked about, you recognise that the humble Excel spreadsheet could be used by the entire supply chain, and they're asking, did you consult with the supply chain about the new approach, and how's that going, and what was the feedback you've had? Really?
Yeah, we've had extensive engagement with the supply chain and with stakeholders within the Environment Agency through various different channels and communication routes. The Environment Agency runs across its supply chain. It has a digital community of practice which meets about every 2 months. It has a health and safety community of practice, similar sort of meeting schedule. So we've presented the project and updated those groups pretty frequently during its development, and we've also met with other groups within the supply chain, so the commercial management groups, the framework directors, framework managers. We've presented to them. We've engaged with individual suppliers, as well as then other groups that are within the agency as well, their whole project management community. So yeah, engagement has been really essential on this project, and we certainly engaged with an awful lot of people to hopefully bring them along on this journey with us.
And generally, are people complying with the requirements?
So the requirements are not actually contractual yet, so we will be bringing them into the they will be commercially required when the Environment Agency publish the next update of their exchange information requirements, which is due in April. And at that point, new projects going into contract after that date will be required to work to this process. So we're still in the implementation, final throes really of the development and implementation phase, and then from April it will be contractual on new projects, and we will therefore be monitoring how those new projects are getting on and helping them to adjust and realign to this new requirement as they need.
Just adding to that, Karen mentioned that there were 800 projects. There's now 1,400 live projects in this framework. So it's a volume game to get these things introduced. It's not a question of just going to a project and introducing it. You have to introduce it gradually and in a phased way. But the support generally from suppliers and internal team has been good, because it standardizes their approach.
Have you trialed it on any projects yet then, or is it going to be rolled out?
We use some projects during the development stage to let's take what you've got, and those were Jacobs projects. Let's take the information that you've got might have been in your design or risk assessment, and let's translate that into this schema and just test it that way. And then we've used that information to then test the dashboarding approach and all of that other thing. And one project has then been the guinea pig for testing then how it delivers the information through to the Environment Agency system as well. So we've used that project as the test case to run it through on all the systems and effectively demonstrate, use that project to show the proof of concept, really.
Oh, okay. Bernard is asking a question about the BIM data and project data, and who will actually own the data provided by the stakeholders. I mean, I guess that's in any project who might own the data. I don't know whether someone might like to answer that.
I think that's defined in the contract between the parties, and
Okay.
and it's once it's published in the CDE, it's owned by the Environment Agency. But because of the way BIM works, until it's published, it's actually owned by the author of the data, even though we might all be able to see it. So if it's marked as shared, then it's owned by the author of the data, even though others might have access to it. But once it's been published, it succumbs to whatever the project contract says.
Okay, thank you. A few questions for George that have come in. Perhaps I'll give you a couple at the same time, George.
Denise, sorry, George has had to leave, so we will we'll gather the questions for George and we'll send them on separately.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Okay, so a few more questions for on the Environment Agency project. Someone's asking whether suppliers need to buy into Autodesk and Microsoft products. Will they have to do that to satisfy the requirements?
Luckily, we surveyed all our supply chain and they're all using them. So we're able to focus on those, but our basic standards are open standards, hence why we've used the Excel spreadsheet. So the fact is that we're able to produce the CAD and object standard based on Autodesk products, but we would they are exemplars, so we've got no restriction on what the supply chain can use. So it's a bleeding edge sort of point where luckily all of our supply chain were using those products, so we could standardize on them in terms of the CAD and object standard.
Okay, thank you. And this is a question from me, if you don't mind. Obviously, it's called, you know, in the title is very much about managing data, saving lives. It'd be great to hear from you, Karen, how the Environment Agency might use this data in a way that to provide information that you wouldn't have had before, really. You know, where does the saving lives come into it? Sorry, you're on mute. Still on mute, sorry.
One of the main areas is actually having consistency, so we have greater awareness of the risks, and also being able to understand those risks and factor in actions that we need to take to mitigate and sort of manage those risks. At the moment, that is done, you know, team by team, but in the future we'll be able to consider those at a more corporate level and aid people to be managing those risks, particularly in operations, more consistently. And I think that's where you know, we talk about sort of digital. You know, digital is the opposite to analog. In an analog world, people do it; they do the joining up. In a digital world, you have a common language that allows you to both understand but also automate. So, you know, being able to push data into our asset management system, push data into EasyMap, talked about having apps. You know, this is about enabling people to have better information because we've standardized it, which means we can start doing smarter things with it going forward in the future, as well as, you know, from a corporate level, you know, strengthening our response to risk so that we reduce the variation, particularly when you've got staff with, you know, a variation of skills in this area.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I'm very sorry. Unfortunately, we've run out of time and I have to draw the session to a close. I'm sorry, Chris, that I didn't get a chance to ask you a question, so forgive me. But just to let you know again that the webinar has been recorded, so you can watch it again or share the video with your peers and colleagues, and that's via the original registration link. And as I said earlier, that will be available from tomorrow morning. For more on the Sharing Data, Saving Lives project, you can go to discoveringsafety.com. And for more on IdeaGen Mail Manager, please go to mailmanager.com. Well, it simply remains for me to say a thank you to IdeaGen Mail Manager for supporting this webinar, and thank you very much to Karen, to Chris, to David, and to Graham for your time, and also George, your time, and fantastic input and fantastic comprehensive look at both subjects. So thank you. And thank you to our audience for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.